It doesn't really feel like it to me, but technically we could be almost halfway through this generation of consoles, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S. That's right, that means that my PlayStation 4, along with many others, was put on the shelf about 3.5 years ago at this point, and now it's just collecting dust. Even though I got mine quite late in its life, I still had some amazing times with this console, and so today I want to talk about the games that I played most on the PS4. Now this video does have PlayStation exclusives, but it also just has other games that I happen to play on the console. These games aren't in any particular order, but I'm going to start with Final Fantasy VII Remake because at the time of recording I've just finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I've been really enjoying the Final Fantasy VII Remake saga. It doesn't happen too often, but every now and then there is a game that I A, take time off of work to play, and then B, basically do nothing else until I've finished that game. And Final Fantasy VII Remake 4 years ago was one of those games. I've not really played the original Final Fantasy VII. I tried to get into it a few times over the years, but I never even really got out of Midgar. But on the other hand, Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core prequel was one of my favourite games on the PSP, and I couldn't really tell you what it was that made me pick this game up back in the day, but I ended up playing that one through a few times, and that's how I really got to know Zack, Cloud, Sephiroth, and Aerith. So with a modern remake of Final Fantasy VII having these gorgeous looking graphics and a brand new combat system, I was pretty excited to give it a go. And then it didn't take me long to start seriously enjoying the game, and I basically completely finished it over a long weekend. Now I did have a bit of a problem with the pacing of the game. Sometimes it felt like it had been stretched too much out, and there were points where I wasn't too keen on being forced to do side quests only at certain points, like there was your only opportunity to do them, but those were my only two downsides of playing this game really. But other than that, I absolutely love this game. It can take you a little bit of time to get used to the combat, but once you do, I think it's a really good system. It's a lot of fun to play. It feels very slick, and it does look quite flashy, but at the same time it does have a lot of depth once you get into things like, you know, which material you equip and the character switching aspect of it. This game cemented my love for the Final Fantasy VII world after being introduced to it through Crisis Core. I do think that they improved on a lot of things with Rebirth, except for perhaps the ending of that game, which I wasn't too keen on. But, you know, generally if you want to get stuck into a big RPG series, then I would recommend giving Final Fantasy VII Remake a shot first. And then if you do like it, there's a lot more where that came from with Rebirth, the remake of Crisis Core, and of course the third and final entry into the remake trilogy will be coming in a few years' time. Now, Kingdom Hearts is another series that I ended up playing out of order accidentally. I did try and get into some of the earlier games, but really by the time I picked them up they felt quite clunky to me. So actually Kingdom Hearts 3 was the first entry into the Kingdom Hearts series that I properly played, and I played it on PS4. The big draw for me was that mix of, you know, Square Enix Final Fantasy characters and Disney characters together in one giant story. I just talked about Final Fantasy and the idea of fighting Sephiroth or, you know, meeting Cloud in the same game as, you know, characters like Stitch, Donald Duck, Goofy. You know, it just sounds great to me. Sadly, by the time Kingdom Hearts 3 came around, it seemed like a lot of the Final Fantasy characters weren't really involved anymore, but I did still have a lot of fun with this game. I do like Disney. I know it's not always that cool to say it, but I did grow up on a lot of these films like everybody else. I'm not a mega fan, but I would still be sort of intrigued and delighted whenever we went to a new world, and some characters that I knew from my childhood would pop up. I also remember feeling a really good sense of power progression as you play that game. By the time you sort of get a good chunk of the way through, you have all sorts of new combos that unlock, additional spells. I think at one point you can learn to sort of fly or glide. I always like it when games build you up slowly until you feel more and more powerful like that. And that meant that this, on top of this setting, kept me playing all the way through till the end. Now, I will say that there's so many Kingdom Hearts games that there were definitely times when I didn't really understand what was going on with the overarching story, but each individual Disney world that you go to has sort of a self-contained story, and so that was kind of enough for me. I do still wonder about going back to play some of those older games from time to time, seeing where everything began, and, you know, seeing the games that actually did have the Final Fantasy characters in. But I did have a really good time with Kingdom Hearts 3. Next up we have Ratchet and Clank, and actually this was one of the very first games that I got on my PlayStation 4. It wasn't the whole reason that I bought the console, we'll come to that later, but it was one that I was very excited to play when I first got it. My brother and I had one or two of the older Ratchet and Clank games on the PlayStation 2, and so that's kind of what made me decide to get this one. I don't have much of a memory of the older Ratchet and Clank games except for I think the beginning of one of the ones we played where you're sort of in this reality TV show arena style and you're part of Team Dark Star, and I did look it up and it seems like it's called Ratchet Deadlocked in America or Ratchet Gladiator over here in Europe where I'm from. Now, I actually don't think that this version of Ratchet & Clank was too well received. I remember hearing things about how people didn't like the sort of movie tie-in and how a lot of the cutscenes were just lifted straight from the movies, and also I think people thought that Ratchet, he had a bit of his edge taken away, he was a bit too soft now. But this didn't really bother me too much. I had a really good time with this game. In terms of graphics, it looked fantastic, and it was just as funny as I remember the older Ratchet & Clanks being, and I really enjoyed the gunplay in this one as well. So overall, you know, it had everything that I wanted in the game, and I had a really good time with it. Now, I do think that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is better. It's one of my favorite games on PS5, but I still think that the PS4 entry is really good, and me enjoying both of those means that, you know, when they announce another one, I will probably buy it straight away. Next up is another entry into this list by Insomniac, and it is Spider-Man. I've always been a superhero fan. I don't read that many comic books these days, but I do still have a stack of them from when I was younger, and of course, like, I think basically everybody, I really enjoyed the PlayStation 2 Spider-Man game that was a tie-in to the Spider-Man 2 movie with Dr. Octopus. So I was pretty excited for this one when it was first announced, and it really did deliver, didn't it? I think Insomniac and Sony showed us just how good a superhero game can actually be. This game really makes you feel like Spider-Man. Okay, you know, jokes aside, I think that I barely did any fast traveling in this game because the web swinging mechanic was so good. It was just so well crafted, and they built such a good version of New York City that I didn't want to fast travel at all. I just wanted to swing through, and I enjoyed even that aspect of the game. Normally, you know, getting from A to B is not that fun in games, but in Spider-Man, they made it even that interesting. And it didn't hurt the game that had really good combat, it had a great story, and, you know, just the cast of villains was really superb. I was really excited to see that cutscene in one of the original trailers where you seem to be fighting a lot of those villains at once. That really did land for me. The Miles Morales follow-up game was also one of my favourites, but I did end up playing that on PS5. I've not gotten to Spider-Man 2 yet, sadly. I really want to, but I didn't have a lot of time last year. I'm really hoping to get to it this year, just based on how good that first game was. Next up is Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, I'm not too sure what the general consensus is with Dragon Age Inquisition these days, whether people think it's a good game or if they don't remember it too fondly, but I spent a long time playing this game, and I've actually got this memory of release day of this game. So the first time that I tried to play it, I couldn't get into it very much, but on release day I got it on PC, and it was one of those releases where it came out at slightly different times depending on where in the world you were, and so this was the first time I ever downloaded a VPN to get access to a game slightly early. I love the setting of Dragon Age in general. You know, epic fantasy has always been my thing. That's the books I read, the films I watch. A lot of the games I play, I really like epic fantasy settings, and the first Dragon Age is one of my favourite games ever. It's one of those that I would really love a remake for. The premise in this game of building up your own faction to save the world was really good. I thought it let the developers add in this politics aspect, which I actually thought fit in really nicely with the rest of the game and how it works with the world. I don't really remember loads about the main story at this point. It was quite a long time ago that I played it, but I do remember just having fun exploring and discovering lots of secrets. So one of my strongest memories with Inquisition was coming across this side boss that you didn't have to fight. It was sort of one of these hidden world bosses, and it was just this giant dragon, and I just remember having this epic combat against it for quite a long time, and when I finally did defeat it, I think I got some good loot from it as well. The fight looked spectacular, and the fact that I found it all on my own made it even more rewarding. I'm not sure how confident I am with how things are at BioWare at the moment, how good a new Dragon Age will be, you know, when they finally make Dragon Age 4, but I'm really hopeful that it can capture some of the magic of the early games in the series. The Witcher 3 is probably one of the most beloved RPGs ever made. It's definitely one of the most famous ones. Everybody knows about it. Now, this is one of the more bleaker RPG settings. It's not normally what I'm into. I do like it when things are kind of a bit happier at times, but the game was still so well made that I ended up loving it all the same. One of the main points of The Witcher 3 is just how much time, detail, and care is put into the quests. There are side missions in this game that have more thought, and they're better put together than the main story quests of, you know, a lot of games these days. So if you love diving into games that have so much detail put into the storylines, the characters, and the world, then this is definitely one for you. You could just spend hours and hours going around all the side objectives, hunting all the secrets in the world, and there's a whole bunch of really well crafted monsters, and depending on what kind of difficulty you fancy taking on, You can really dive into the monster hunting aspect of it, you know, creating tonics and that kind of thing, working out what the monster's weaknesses are. And at the same time, if you don't want to do that, then you can just turn the difficulty down a bit and you don't have to worry about it too much. The fights become manageable without those things. I completed the main game for Witcher 3 and also the Hearts of Stone expansion, but I do kind of regret that I never then went on to Blood and Wine. I've heard it's really good, but just at that point I played a lot of Witcher and I kind of needed a break, and then I really struggled to get back into it. But I'm really hoping one of these days that I do finally finish off that expansion and I can say that I played everything in The Witcher 3. So when I was talking about Ratchet Clank, I mentioned that it was one of the first games that I played on PS4, but it wasn't the main reason that I got the PS4, and actually that was God of War. I got my PlayStation 4 in February 2018, which was a couple of months before the release of God of War, and I basically got it to play this game. I hadn't really played anything in the God of War series before this. I never had a PlayStation 3, which I think is where a lot of people played it, and while we did have a PS2 and we used our PS2 a lot, I was kind of that age where, you know, my parents were quite strict about what kind of games we were allowed to play on it, and we did sneak Time Splitters 2 by them, so there was absolutely no way after that we were going to get away with playing God of War on there. But the new game looked so good that it was literally a system seller for me. There's not a lot I can say about God of War and Ragnarok that's not already been said. They're just masterpieces of storytelling in a game. I fell in love with the characters, the setting, and the combat right away, and I was completely hooked on the story basically from the get-go. That very first fight with the stranger in God of War 1, that's probably one of the best openings to any game that I can think of. It's right up there. You know, it's probably number one. Ghost of Tsushima also did it really well, but God of War, the opening to that game was incredible. If you somehow not played God of War at this point, I really recommend it. You can even buy it on Steam if you'd rather play it on PC these days. I just think everybody should experience this game. So I know it's out on basically every console these days, Xbox and Switch and PC, but back when I played it, Persona 5 was actually a PlayStation 4 exclusive. When I picked it up, I wasn't really into my turn-based RPGs too much. I was sort of having a break from them, but Persona 5 just looked so stylish that I had to give it a go, and everybody was singing its praises, so I thought it must be good. And I did really enjoy the mix of dungeon crawling and the social sim aspects, managing your time and focusing on what you wanted to get done in the sort of limited time that the game gave you. I never played anything like that before, and I did really like it. It really helps you get to know the main characters better, and I don't think there are many games that have as good of a main cast as Persona 5. I also think that the music of Persona 5 is possibly one of the best soundtracks in any game ever. I listen to video game music quite a lot, and there's quite a few Persona 5 songs that make it onto my playlist. I think the music it really gels with the style of the game, and it helps make everything feel that much cooler. I think it's one of my biggest gaming regrets that I've never managed to finish Persona 5. I really like the game, but it's so long. You know, you can put 120 hours into it if you want to. And I think between playing Persona 5 originally on the PlayStation 4, and then when Royal came out, I played that as well. I think between the two, I've probably played, 70 to 100 hours, but I've just never managed to finish it. But I think the playtime speaks for itself, just how much I enjoyed it. And even just talking about it now, it makes me want to go back and try again. Maybe this time I will finish it. So from an RPG with a great soundtrack to a fast-paced action shooter that also has a great soundtrack, Doom 2016 was the very first Doom game that I played, and I don't really think I could have asked for a better entry into the series. I don't play that many shooters these days, but Doom and Doom Eternal, they just feel so slick and fast-paced. Everything feels fine-tuned to perfection. The game can be hard, but once you've got a bit of practice in, you can pull off some feats that look amazing, and all with that awesome heavy metal soundtrack really sort of pushing you on. It's just a game that makes you feel really powerful. You blast through the minions of hell. Sometimes in the game you rip them apart with your bare hands. And I also really like it when from time to time one of them recognizes who you are, and I think that just makes things feel really awesome, that you are the one person on earth that hell fears. There wasn't a lot to the story of this game, but that was okay because the gameplay was so fun, it carried the whole thing. And I think it helped that it wasn't an overly drawn out game. You could sort of beat it in a little over 10 hours, and it's one of the only games that I've played all the way through twice. Once on the PlayStation 4, and then once later when I was getting really into my Switch, I got it on Switch as well and played it again. It is really fun playing it in handheld on the Switch, but it runs so good on things like PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 now. If you're going to try it out, I'd recommend it on one of the more powerful consoles. Finally, we have Uncharted. Now, Uncharted 4 is probably my favorite Uncharted game, but I played that on PS5. I got my start on PS4 with Uncharted playing the remastered Nathan Drake collection, which was games 1 to 3. If you ask me what my favourite games were, I'm not sure if I would necessarily think of Uncharted right away, but when I was writing this I realised that it's one of the only series that I can think of where I've actually played basically every game in the series. All the other ones I can think of, I've missed a few. Even Dragon Age I didn't really play. Dragon Age 2 I just played 1 and Inquisition. Bioshock I played 1 and 3. Final Fantasy I've only been getting into them later. But Uncharted I played all of the main games. I think the only one that I haven't played is the one that's on PSP. So I do really like the series. Not being a huge fan of Tomb Raider in the past, Uncharted really showed me how fun these sort of adventure style games could be. Now the original 3 I played them all quite close together, so they have sort of merged together in my mind, but I kind of remember I wasn't the biggest fan of 1, but I enjoyed it enough that I then went on to play 2 and 3, and that's where the series really started to shine in my opinion, and that's where I also really started to enjoy the sort of set piece moments like the train scene and the plane scene in 2 and 3. It helped that I really liked the characters and I could feel the gameplay slowly improving as the series went on. Like I said, Uncharted 4 is my favourite, but I never would have gotten to game number 4 if 1, 2 and 3 hadn't been so great of an introduction. Well, there we have it. Those are my favourite games, the games that I played most on PlayStation 4. Writing this video has made me realise just how many firsts I sort of had with the PS4, and even though I only had the console for a few years before the PS5 came out, there was still so much there for me to enjoy. I'd love to hear what games are your favourites on this console, whether they're exclusives or not. So please let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.